The registered letter arrived on a Thursday morning in April, tucked between a delivery slip and a flyer from a real estate agent I'd never heard of. I was unlocking the front door of my studio when I noticed it. My name printed in block letters, return address from a family law firm in Guelph I didn't recognize. I almost set it aside to read after my first coffee. Something made me open it right there on the steps. 12 pages. The cover letter explained, in language so calm it felt almost patronizing, that the ceramic art studio I had built over 7 years, the equipment, the inventory, the commercial lease, all of it, was being cited as a shared marital asset in an active divorce proceeding. My sister was the respondent. Her husband was the applicant. And buried on page 3 was a partnership agreement, dated 4 years earlier, bearing both of our names, claiming she and I had been equal co-owners of the business since it opened. I had never signed a partnership agreement with my sister. I had never offered her co-ownership of anything. The studio was mine, every dollar of the down payment, every early morning, every kiln load, every market weekend, mine. Before I tell you the rest of this, do me a favor, hit the like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm genuinely curious how far this story travels. I was 32 years old when everything fell apart. The studio had been open for 4 years by then, but the road to owning it started long before that. I had been working as a dental hygienist in Waterloo for nearly a decade, picking up every Saturday appointment I could get, driving an 11-year-old Civic that rattled on the highway every winter and needed new brakes twice in 3 years. Ceramics was how I survived the monotony of it. I rented kiln time at a community arts center in the evenings, sold pieces at farmers markets on weekends, slowly built something that felt like a real direction rather than a detour. My goal was always to have my own space, not a shared studio, not a rental corner in someone else's building, my own. I saved $41,000 over 6 years. I gave up vacations, I stopped eating out, I bought clothes maybe twice a year and kept a spreadsheet of every single expense so I knew, to the dollar, where I stood at the end of each month. My sister used to joke at family dinners that I was the only person she knew who budgeted her laundry quarters. I never minded the teasing. I knew what the money was for. When the commercial unit came available on a main street in a small town, about 40 minutes outside Guelph, I drove out to see it on a February morning when the sidewalks were still packed with dirty snow. The space was raw, cold concrete floor, water-stained ceiling tiles, a smell of old machine oil that hung in the air, but the back room had good ventilation and the ceiling was high enough for a proper kiln installation. I made an offer the following week. Nobody co-signed the loan. Nobody helped with the deposit. I borrowed $62,000 through a small business loan from my credit union and put down the $41,000 I'd saved, and the business was registered through the Ontario Business Registry under my name alone. I spent 3 months doing most of the renovation work myself with 2 friends, and a lot of long weekends. There were blisters and arguments with the electrical inspector, and one truly terrible afternoon when we discovered the plumbing behind the east wall was older than it looked. The day I fired the kiln for the first time in that space, I sat down on the concrete floor in my work clothes and cried. Not because I was sad, because I had done it. Running the studio was harder than I'd imagined and exactly what I'd hoped for at the same time. I opened with a small retail front, a 6-person class schedule, and more ambition than operating capital. HST filings, equipment maintenance, supply orders, marketing, teaching, all of it running alongside my hygienist shifts for the first 2 years. There were months where I looked at the bank statement and couldn't understand how it had all still added up. But it always did, because I made sure it did. Every invoice had my name on it. Every business tax filing went through my accountant under my sole proprietorship number. The studio was mine in every legal and practical sense, and not once in 7 years had anyone contributed a dollar toward any of it. That fact should have made the document in my hands impossible. Instead, it was apparently the reason my sister had decided to drag me into the wreckage of her marriage. I dialed her number the moment I stepped back inside the studio and locked the door behind me. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Same result. I sent a text that said, "Call me as soon as you get this. I'm holding a legal document with your name on it, and I need an explanation right now." No reply came that morning. No reply came that afternoon. My sister and her husband had been unraveling for a while. That much wasn't a secret. She'd moved out of the house they'd shared in Kitchener the previous autumn, and the divorce proceedings had started formally before Christmas. I had stayed out of it as much as I could manage. I offered to listen when she needed to talk, dropped food off when she was low, tried not to take sides or make statements that might be repeated in the wrong direction. I thought that was what a good sister did. I didn't realize she had been making completely different kinds of plans. That evening, I drove to my parents' house without calling ahead. My mother opened the door and looked at me without any surprise. That was the first thing I noticed. Not confusion, not worry, just a kind of tired steadiness, like someone who had been expecting a knock and was mildly relieved it had finally come. My sister was already at the kitchen table. My father was standing near the counter with his hands in his pockets, not quite looking at either of us. Nobody spoke for a moment. I put the document on the table in front of my sister. "Explain this to me." She glanced at it briefly and then looked away. Not the look of someone encountering something surprising. The look of someone trying to decide how much to concede. My father cleared his throat. My mother sat down. "This is a family matter," my mother said quietly. "We should be talking about it like one." I kept my eyes on my sister. "I am talking about it. I'm asking her to tell me why a law firm in Guelph is claiming she owns half my business." My sister folded her hands on the table. "The divorce is costing more than I planned. My lawyer said if there was shared property that—" "Stop," I said. "Did you file a partnership agreement with my name on it?" She looked at the table. "I never signed anything," I said. "I never agreed to give you any part of the studio. You know that." My mother leaned forward. "She's your sister. She's going through something very painful right now. You have more than enough. Helping her through this is what family does." Something cold moved through my chest. That's not the point. Someone filed a document with my forged signature. I need to know how that happened and who was involved. Silence. My father looked at the counter. My sister kept her eyes down. My mother folded and unfolded her hands without saying another word. I had driven to that house expecting a denial, or an excuse, or at least some version of an explanation that I could try to make sense of. What I got was silence. And silence, I realized, was its own kind of confession. I left without finishing what I'd planned to say. The next morning, I called my accountant before 8, and then drove to the Ontario Business Registry Service Centre as soon as it opened. I gave my business registration number at the counter, and asked for a complete record of every filing associated with it over the past 3 years. The clerk printed a stack of documents, clipped them together, and slid them across without much ceremony. Most of it I recognized immediately. My original registration, annual confirmation statements, my HST registration. Then I turned a page and my hand stopped moving. A partnership agreement amendment, filed 11 months earlier. According to the document, I had voluntarily converted my sole proprietorship to a general partnership and granted a 50% ownership interest in the business to my sister. The filing had been accepted and officially recorded. As far as any provincial registry search was concerned, she co-owned everything I had built. I stared at the signature block. My name was there, written in a hand that resembled mine at first glance. But I have signed my name the same way since I was a teenager. There's a particular way I formed the last letter of my surname, a small habit I picked up from a calligraphy book I borrowed from a school library and never returned. This version had the stroke going the wrong direction. The pressure of the pen was heavier than I ever write. Someone had studied my signature carefully, not carefully enough. I photographed every page before I left. On the drive back, I kept returning to one question. Whoever had done this hadn't just copied a signature onto a blank form. They had known my business registration number. They had known exactly which filing category to use and what supporting details to include. They had access to information that doesn't live on a public website. 2 years earlier, during a studio renovation, I had stored a box of old business files at my parents' house, early registration papers, old supplier contracts, insurance summaries. My mother had offered to keep them safe while I repainted the back office. I had picked them up a few months later without checking every single folder. When I loaded them back into my car, I had been in a hurry. My sister had spent nearly 2 weeks at my parents' house around that same time, after a bad stretch in her marriage. She would have had full access to every room. That afternoon I drove back to my parents' house while I knew they'd both be out. My mother keeps a spare key in the same spot she's kept it for 15 years, under a ceramic planter by the back gate. One I made for her, which was not lost on me in that moment. I let myself in and went directly to the home office off the main hallway. Third shelf, behind a shoebox of old greeting cards, a manila folder with my business name written on the tab in my mother's handwriting. Inside were photocopies of my original registration documents, a copy of my business bank agreement, 2 old insurance summaries, and something I had never seen before. A printed template for a sole proprietorship to general partnership conversion, partially filled out. The handwriting in the blanks was my sister's. I knew it immediately. Next to the folder, still in its plastic shipping sleeve, was a notary stamp with my name engraved on it. The receipt was tucked inside the packaging. It had been ordered 7 months earlier from an online office supply company and shipped to my parents' home address. I sat on the floor of that office for a long time. This had not been a desperate decision made in a moment of panic. Someone had looked up which documents were required, ordered the tools to make them appear official, assembled photocopies of my identifying paperwork, and submitted everything through a system that trusted what it received. The planning had started months before I ever received that registered letter. All of it aimed at something I had poured 7 years of my life into building. I photographed every item in that folder before putting it back exactly as I'd found it. 2 evenings later, I was at the studio working late when I heard a vehicle pull into the parking lot. A dark SUV. 2 men in jackets who didn't look like they were there to buy pottery. They stood outside looking at the building the way you look at a property you're considering acquiring. Taking in the square footage, noting the windows, assessing rather than admiring. I went to the front door. "Can I help you?" The taller of the two smiled pleasantly. "We're here on behalf of a legal firm acting in the divorce proceedings. We've been asked to do a preliminary valuation of the assets on site." "This is private property," I said. "You don't have permission to assess or enter anything here. It's fairly routine in cases of joint." "There is no joint ownership," I said. "Leave now." The second man glanced past me toward the back of the studio. "Your sister mentioned the 2 large kilns were recently serviced. Those hold considerable value." That sentence landed like ice water. My sister had visited the studio 4 months earlier, a casual drop-in after a Saturday market. She had asked about the kiln maintenance schedule while we were standing right next to them. I had answered her without a second thought because she was my sister, and I had no reason to guard myself from my own sister. I raised my phone so they could see it. "I'm recording this. You have 30 seconds before I call the OPP." They exchanged a look. The taller one adjusted his jacket. "Think carefully about your position here," he said in a tone that was still polite but had shifted slightly. "The documentation your sister has is on record." "I know exactly what's on record," I said. 30 seconds. They got in the SUV and left. I stood in the parking lot after the taillights disappeared down the road. It was mid-October, cold enough that I could see my breath, and I hadn't thought to grab a jacket on my way out. Through the studio windows, I could see the 2 large kilns I had spent over 2 years saving to upgrade. The centerpiece of every class, the machines that had transformed raw clay into something real and sellable and mine. My sister had walked into this space and cataloged what she could take. I went back inside, locked the door, and called my lawyer. She told me to bring everything to her office first thing in the morning. I did. The following Saturday morning, my sister arrived at the studio parking lot with my mother and my aunt. They came together, which told me the visit had been coordinated. My sister led the way across the gravel with the same expression she used to wear before an argument when we were teenagers, jaw set, already certain she was in the right before a word had been spoken. I met them at the door. I didn't open it. "We need to talk," my sister said. "My lawyer is handling this now," I said. "There's nothing to talk about directly." My mother stepped forward. "You are going to destroy this family over property. Is that really what you want?" "I didn't start this," I said. "She is your sister." My mother's voice dropped to something quieter. "She has nothing right now. Her whole life has come apart. You have your business, you have your career, you have everything you wanted. Is it really so impossible to help her through this?" I looked at my mother, the woman who had kept a folder with my business name on it in her home office, who had been there presumably when a notary stamp with my name on it sat on her shelf in its plastic packaging. "She forged my signature," I said. "She filed false documents with the provincial registry. She sent men here to assess my equipment. That isn't asking for help. That's fraud." My sister's expression shifted for just a fraction of a second. Something behind her eyes that looked almost like surprise at hearing the word said plainly. Then it closed back down. My aunt spoke from behind them. "Family doesn't take family to court. You work it out. That's what you do." I looked at each of them in turn. My mother, my sister, my aunt, who had driven here to lend weight to something she hadn't built and couldn't understand. "You're on my property," I said. "I'd like you to leave." I went back inside and called the Ontario Provincial Police non-emergency line from my office chair. The responding officer arrived within 20 minutes. My family was still in the parking lot. They hadn't moved. The officer listened to my account, looked through the folder of evidence I had prepared. The forged partnership amendment from the registry, photographs of the template and the notary stamp from my parents' office, the shipping receipt, and screenshots of text messages from my sister referencing our arrangement. Messages I had screenshotted the morning after I'd found the registry documents, suddenly understanding for the first time what she had meant by them months earlier. My mother tried to intervene as I was speaking. "Officer, this is a civil matter between sisters. There's really no need to." The officer turned to her, unhurried. "Ma'am, filing a forged document with a provincial business registry is a criminal matter. I'll ask you to step back, please." Those words did something I hadn't expected. Not because they were louder than anything else that morning, because they were simply, cleanly, factually true, and hearing them said plainly by someone with no stake in the outcome made everything my family had tried to frame as a misunderstanding suddenly impossible to misframe. I gave a formal statement. I signed it. The investigating officers contacted the Ontario Business Registry within the week. A forensic document examiner confirmed that the signature on the partnership amendment did not match samples of my authenticated handwriting. The notary stamp had not been registered to any licensed notary in the province. It had been purchased through an online office supplier and used without any legal authority. The amendment was formally voided. My sole proprietorship status was restored. My sister was charged with forgery and fraud. Those proceedings are ongoing. Her husband's legal team withdrew the business asset claim once the voided amendment was confirmed. His lawyer sent a brief letter acknowledging that the documents had been fraudulent. That was the last communication I received from anyone connected to that divorce. My father and I have spoken a handful of times since then, short calls, careful ones. He didn't participate in what my sister and mother planned, as far as the investigation determined, but he had known those documents were in the house. He had seen the folder. He had said nothing. That silence sits between us now, and I haven't decided what it means for us in the long run. My mother and I have not spoken. I don't have a clean answer about what comes next between us. What I know is that she kept my business records in her home, had a forged template in a folder with my company name written on the tab, and stood in my parking lot, asking me to protect my sister from consequences she helped create. That tells me what I need to know about the choices she made. I had the studio's entry locks rekeyed the week after the police report. I installed a security camera system and a coded lock on the supply room door. A few people in my life thought that was an overreaction. I thought it was something I should have done years earlier. 7 months have passed. I teach 4 classes a week now. The retail side has been strong. The fall market season was the best I've had, and I started a small wholesale account with 2 gift shops in the county. The kilns are running well. The work is good. There are mornings when I come in early and just stand at the work table before anyone else arrives, looking at the space, and I still feel what I felt the first time I fired that kiln here. I didn't expect clarity to be the thing that came out of all this. I expected anger or grief or some long period of feeling broken. I had some of those things, but underneath all of it, what kept appearing was something simpler. I know exactly what this cost me to build, and no one else does. You can copy a signature. You can file paperwork. You can show up at someone's door with numbers and leverage and the weight of family obligation. But you cannot replicate the specific knowledge of what something is worth to the person who built it. Not the market value, not the asset valuation, but the actual weight of what it took. My sister knew the kilns were worth something. She didn't know what they meant to me, because that part was never available to her. That was the miscalculation. My name is the only one on the business registration. After everything, the forged amendment, the investigation, the charges still moving through the system, it was always only ever mine. That's where it ends. If this story reached you, leave a like and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.